welcome to episode 8 of Poetry Worth Hearing, hosted by me, Kathleen McPhillamy, and with music by Alex Heen. This episode will largely be devoted to the poet Dinah Livingstone, talking about her work and reading from her many collections. Dinah is a distinguished poet whose publications go back over 6 decades. She is also a teacher, translator, editor, publisher, and for many years my mentor and friend. You will find more about her work on the website poetryworthhearing.biz. In a wide-ranging interview, Dinah talks about her early influences, running the poetry workshop Camden Voices, where I first met her, working as a translator, and the ideas about theology and politics which fundamentally inform her work. First, though, and very relevant to Poetry Worth Hearing, here is her take on the sound of poetry. This podcast is called Poetry Worth Hearing. So maybe if you could say a little bit about the importance of the sound of poetry. I'm thinking back to that quote from Hopkins, which is one of your favourites.
Oh yes, one of my favourite quotes from Hopkins is, poor man as a Jesuit had very scant opportunity to perform his poems, but he says, poetry, the darling child of speech and lips and spoken utterance, till it is spoken, it is not performed. It does not perform. It is not itself. And preferably performed live with other live people in the audience so that you can interact, because that is when it is most embodied. But we can at least do our best on a podcast because you have got a speaking voice. And I think that's one of the extra richnesses of poetry. You know, I think that the point about poetry is that it can say a lot in a little. It's very, very condensed language. And one of the ways that it condenses is by sound, because the sound carries all kinds of connotations, allusions, and it packs more meaning in. Also, the intonation, the way in which you speak the poem adds meaning. In fact, when you perform a poem, sometimes you bring out a particular meaning that hasn't even occurred to you before. You know that it adds a great deal to the poem, the actual sound. And of course, when you're live, I did a reading at Torriano last Sunday. It was such a joy that there was the audience full and you could interact with them. But another thing to think about is that what about all those conventional rhythms and meters? Well, what I think is that it's good for the contemporary poet to know those and to be familiar with them, and as a practice to write a sonnet. But obviously, one of the most important things is how to get a good rhythm, not without a conventional meter, the poem that sounds good, that isn't necessarily in iambic pentameter or whatever, because I think, as usual, it's good to have both and, you know, that's if you want to write a sonnet in 14 lines of iambic pentameter, fair enough, but don't only do that. Be able to write in free verse, which in some ways is much more difficult.
And now we move to the interview proper. Dinah and I had discussed the questions I would ask, and here she gives her answers.
You sent me some questions, Kathleen, and the first one was, how did I get into poetry? Well, as far as I can remember, I've loved rhymes, you know, even when I was really small, and then poems. And then, especially at A-level, we had Keats, Blake and Wordsworth as our set poets, which actually was a great bit of luck. And then I got to London in my early 20s in 1966, and I used to go regularly to the Lamb and Flag pub poetry workshop in Covent Garden, which was run by Norman Hidden. And there at that Lamb and Flag, among other poets, whom I still know today, I met the great Irish poet Madge Herron. And Madge sort of took me under her wing, and she used to come round to my house to try and train me how to actually speak my poems. And so she'd sort of practically bash me around the head and say, "Don't be so fucking mimsy, put your voice over there, over there." And so gradually I learned to project my voice. And then you asked me about what poets influenced me. Well, of course, there were so many, and I can just mention maybe a few. But first of all, this idea of seeing and speaking for myself. And for example, I love that rather confusing poem of Keats, The Fall of Hyperion, but particularly this bit about striving to see, you know, when he's stuck and he's trying to get up the steps, and he says, "I strove hard to escape the numbness, strove to gain the lowest step. Slow, heavy, deadly was my pace. The cold grew stifling, suffocating at the heart, and when I clasped my hands, I felt them not. 1 minute before death, my iced foot touched the lowest stair, and as it touched, life seemed to pour in at the toes. I mounted up as once fair angels on a ladder flew from the green turf to heaven." He got it. And another poem I was very fond of at that time, which, you know, was a great poem for me, was Wordsworth's Tintern Abbey, which was partly about seeing, when he speaks of that serene and blessed mood in which the affections gently lead us on until the breath of this corporeal frame and even the motion of our human blood, almost suspended, we're laid asleep in body and become a living soul, while with an eye made quiet by the power of harmony and the deep power of joy, we see into the life of things. And I loved that deep power of joy by which he sees into the life of things, because I think quite often poets focus more on the deep power of agony, but I think he's quite right about the deep power of joy. And I loved these poets, but of course they were male poets, and I was a woman, and it was the 1960s, and I was a woman wanting both to see and speak for myself and home and family as well. So I wrote this poem, which was set in the freezing cold winter of 1962-3. And the poem is called Nature and Grace, and it actually alludes to the doctrine of nature and grace, that grace doesn't destroy nature, but perfects it. And that idea comes in the poem, but in a rather different context. So this is my poem, Nature and Grace. The book comes in the post, my first published translation, Karl Rahner's Nature and Grace. I was paid £70. Pregnant with my first child, I went straight out to buy an early, fully automatic washing machine for the muslin and terry toweling and the mountains of the rest. My husband was angry. "You should have consulted me," he said. "It's our money." I replied, "It's our washing." He looked bewildered. The idea had not occurred. We liked theology and discussed whether technology doesn't destroy nature but perfects it. Would he have preferred a wife stooped over the sink? Appliances, I maintain, are an asset. What is a gift and cannot be bought is the moment of grace, when, after all your sweat, the printed book arrives and the publisher praises your translation. That can't be done by machine. Or you write what you didn't expect, and it is beyond prose, a poem. And when at last your living child is born, you see his face, and the midwife gives you him to hold, himself and snuffling in your arms. And just a couple more influences. Of course, I was very influenced by Hopkins' richness in words and rhythm, and you can't, you can be influenced by Hopkins, but you mustn't just be so seduced by him that all your poems sound like him. But he just has that wonderful richness. For example, in his poem Inversnade, I'll just quote a little bit of it. This darksome burn, horseback brown, his roll rock high road roaring down, in coop and in comb, the fleece of his foam flutes, and to the lake falls home. A wind puff bonnet of fawn froth turns and twindles over the broth of a pool, so pitch black fell frowning, it rounds and rounds, despair to drowning. And so it goes on. It's wonderful, wonderful stuff. And just one more I'd like to mention, which is I love Stevie Smith's humour. I heard Stevie Smith read quite a few times, when I got to London in the 60s and early 70s. And I admired her so much that once when she was reading at the Hornsey College of Art, which was very famous at that time, I went up on stage and curtsied to her and presented her with a bouquet. And one of my favourite poems of hers is her thoughts about the person from Porlock. Because you remember Coleridge complained he couldn't finish Kubla Khan because he was interrupted by a person from Porlock. And here's what Stevie Smith has to say about that. Coleridge received the person from Porlock and ever after called him a curse. Then why did he hurry to let him in? He could have hid in the house. It was not right of Coleridge. In fact, it was wrong. But often we all do wrong. As the truth is, I think he was already stuck with Kubla Khan. He was weeping and wailing, I am finished, finished. I shall never write another word of it. And along comes the person from Porlock and takes the blame for it. Well, those are just four of the many, many poets that influenced me. And then loads more poets influenced me. And what you asked me next, which was you called it poetry and teaching. Well, I ran a workshop called Camden Voices from 1978 to 98. And that was an ILEA evening class for the first decade until, of course, the ILEA was abolished in 1990 by Thatcher. And then I moved it to the Working Men's College. And it was a workshop. And I definitely wouldn't call it teaching, more facilitating. And I certainly learnt more than I taught. Because what I used to do was I always brought in a few poems by usually a contemporary poet. And we'd read those because I thought, and I think the others thought, it was really important to read other poets. And we learned a lot from that. And then in the second half, the members of the group would try out their own poems. And I also learnt a lot from them. So it definitely was another influence on me, all those aspiring poets. And we were all trying together to write our poems and keep up with other contemporary poets. And again, we thought of Keats, since every man whose soul is not a clod hath visions, and would speak if he had loved and been well nurtured in his mother tongue. And then you asked me about poetry and theology and poetry and politics. And in a sense, for me, these two came together. I became converted to Roman Catholicism as a teenager. I was very religious as a teenager. And in fact, when I turned RC, my parents chucked me out of the house because they were absolutely horrified. But then I gradually came to realize that theology was what Blake called poetic tales, a human creation, a sister art to poetry. For example, in his Marriage of Heaven and Hell, Blake says, the ancient poets animated all sensible things with gods or geniuses, and men forgot that all deities reside in the human breast. Or again, in his All Religions Are One, he says, as all men are alike, though infinitely various, so all religions, as all similars, have one source. The true man is the source, he being the poetic genius. But I found that when I stopped believing in the supernatural, somehow not a lot changed. And I wrote this poem, Keeping Faith. It's a poem in 3 sonnets, but I'll just read the first and the final sonnet. And it starts with an angry, accusing fundamentalist having a big go at me. So this is Keeping Faith. You do not have the faith. You are not saved. We know the truth, and you are in the dark. Insistently dogmatic, they believed they had exclusive entry to the park. The park was paradise, not in this world. The locked out doubters fled that attitude which says, you're wrong, we're right, we've got it nailed. No wonder faith's become a dodgy word. Hijacked by dogma, must faith then be lost? So are you faithless if you be yourself, believe in life on earth and humankind? Aren't faith and hope and love a constant quest to fumble through and struggle to fulfill, embody an idea you have in mind? And this is the final sonnet of my poem, Keeping Faith. I've lost belief in supernatural beings. I can no longer find them credible, but urgent still that gospel's old foreseeings of this world changed, so life and love prevail, with God belonging to humanity and born on earth, come down to home with us. The glory and the fullness are to be when all enjoy themselves and live in peace. I knew that I was me when I was 5. I'm grown up now and not a little girl, but still myself, though I don't look the same. Can't faith in the divine vision also thrive, now grown into a mature poetic tale, becoming what was in it all the time? So to come to theology and politics, the 3 main poetic visions in the New Testament are in fact political visions of a fair and kind society. Jesus spoke of a coming reign of God, which is good news for the poor and hungry. Actually, I think Jesus thought that was going to come in the lifetime of some of those standing here present, but it didn't, but it remains a good idea. Paul spoke of humanity as one body in which all share the same bread. And the book of Revelation speaks of the beautiful city in which every tear is wiped away. So for me, theology and politics sort of go together. And here's part of the vision of the beautiful city in Revelation, the final book in the New Testament. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, dressed as a bride for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, see, the home of God is among humans, and he will dwell with them, and they will be his peoples, and God himself will be with them. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Well, William Blake translates that as a vision of a transformed London in his poem Jerusalem. And so I'll just give you a bit of that. The fields from Islington to Marylebone to Primrose Hill and St. John's Wood were builded over with pillars of gold, and there Jerusalem's pillars stood. Her little ones ran on the fields, the Lamb of God among them seen, and fair Jerusalem his bride among the little meadows green. Pancras and Kentish town repose among her golden pillars high, among her golden arches which shine upon the starry sky. And then at the end of this section, he says, in my exchanges every land shall walk, and mine in every land mutual shall build Jerusalem, both heart in heart and hand in hand. And I'm a translator, and one of the poets I've translated is the Nicaraguan poet Ernesto Cardenal, who became Minister of Culture in the Sandinista government. And Ernesto says something similar in his poem Oracle upon Managua, his capital city. And he wrote that poem just after the devastating Managua earthquake in 1973. And by the way, he's a Catholic priest. And here's a little extract from that. After all, God is also city, a classless city, the free city where God is everybody. He, God with everybody, Emmanuel, the universal city, the city where God's humanity is revealed to us. And I echo that idea at the end of my poem, Likeness in Difference. And this poem is also about translating, including a very, very difficult 1,000-page German biography, which was my most recent translation, was just published recently. And so here's my poem, Likeness in Difference. Likeness in Difference. In Regent's Park, I hear the roar from the football field. In whatever language, the roaring sounds the same. Round St. Martin's Gardens, a mother walks with her 2 little ones and speaks a language I don't know. Could it be Bulgarian? But I do understand what she means when she calls one back who has gone too far, or picks up the other who falls and comforts him, just as a mother in English would call and console. Translating that German book was difficult. Huge compound words, interminable sentences whose clauses in unfamiliar order interwove. Verbatim, it would sound ridiculous to us. I labour to sort it out, untangle it like garden wire or wool with a will of its own. Sometimes I needed at least 3 new full stops. A few days later, rereading what I'd done, I was surprised. The English sounded ordinary, a normal procedure, which is the same and not the same. Yet actually, I'm glad German is so German and French so French, that each language is so much itself, but using it is the same activity. As Wordsworth says, there's a peculiar pleasure from likeness in dissimilitude. In my garden, I enjoy herb Robert, periwinkle, philadelphus, fuchsia, rose, all flowering. Goldfinch, blue tit, great tit, robin, wren come to my balcony, all being birds. Just ordinary living can be difficult, but here we are doing our best in London's 300 languages. In imagination, that translates into the city achieved and splendid, where Pancras and Kentish Town repose, the hungry are fed, distressed are comforted, all different kinds of humanity thrive, each enjoying, enriching each other, and all share the common good. I loved the fact that we speak 300 languages in London, and I think that definitely echoes Blake's, you know, in my exchanges, every land shall walk. Well, there we go with the languages anyway. And I'd like to conclude with a few of my fairly recent poems, which pick up some of these themes I've been talking about. And I'll start with this poem set in my small back garden in Camden Town. And it's a kind of take on the old Testament story of Moses in the desert and the burning bush, and the poem itself is called Burning Bush. The fuchsia in my back garden is a sturdy shrub. It keeps on growing. This summer, again and again, it thrust out more red flowers with purple centres, delicate and dangling for the bee. Deep yellow and supported through its spreading branches, nasturtiums tangle as they climb. Like the burning bush that spoke to Moses in the desert, a flaming miracle, it proclaims, I am. My fuchsia's speechless, but I feel it and become its voice. I am, I say, for it and for myself. Should that be we are? Yes, and one divine I am, the living energy for each to be and thrust and rest to do our job. And the next one, well, I love my garden and I love the roses in Regent's Park. But recently, I keep hearing people say, oh, nature is so wonderful. I agree. But then they say, and human beings are just so awful. And I don't really agree with that. So I wrote this poem, and again, it's a London poem, and I've called it Naturally. Naturally. I love this garden, but am grieved when some who praise nature feel they must immediately contrast it with a gleeful loathing of humanity. They wallow in the wrongs that we have done, which indeed we have, but disregard the rest, the kindness and imagination. I walk through the park, where a mass of alkanet, Madonna blue, mingles with pink campion and cow parsley in glorious array. In the playground, I see the children, black and white and pink and brown, with mothers and fathers chatting, exchanging worries and stories. Each keeps an eye on them playing, ready to help or intervene. One encourages a timid boy to climb. Put your foot there. Hang on. Yes, that's right. Another tells her girl who barges in, no, we must wait our turn. We share the swings for everybody. With routine toil and tender care, day after day, forming small citizens. Love is builder of cities. We fall in love and may create new life. We cook and feed a family and guests. All kinds of loving may be ecstatic or just ordinary, strong, persistent, unrecorded, goes on everywhere, all the time, naturally. We're Londoners, and I remember moments in London's history. 1936, the Battle of Cable Street, when Catholic Irish dockers and many more East Enders joined their Jewish neighbours to stop the fascists marching through. No passaran, they shouted in solidarity with Spain. No need to translate the words, just the action. And how that watchword echoed in revolutionary Nicaragua, in a famous poem which thousands sang. Even though we may not be together, love, I promise, no, they shall not pass. Although defeat and failure come repeatedly, so do kindness and poetic vision. The struggle continues for the shining garden city where everyone can flower. Mortal fellow creatures of the earth, still is the human form divine, and humankind is part of nature, not its enemy. And now, here's a poem I wrote last Christmas called Bird Song at Midnight. Again, a London poem, and it has an echo of the angels in the Christmas story. And it's actually true that it was astonishing that in the middle of the night, these birds in the pitch dark were singing. Anyway, here's my poem, Bird Song at Midnight. In the depths of winter, I woke at midnight not to screeching foxes, but the birds were singing. Were they blackbirds, robins? Usually my street, minutes from hectic Camden Tube, is quiet. But sometimes late, and mostly at weekends, I hear disturbing shouts and slams, or just soft voices murmuring. Maybe a couple wandered off from the world's end to be alone. The robin figurine beside my red tin post box disappeared. I like to think it was given as a love token between the two. I wish them well. Tonight, at Christmas time, still the birds are singing like angels gloriously, even though it is dark and love is difficult, and so is peace on earth. And my final poem I'd like to read is called Sleep Sealed. My daughter gave me a black satin nightgown for Christmas. I call it my seal suit. If my grandsons are being a bit annoying, I smile and threaten revenge. I'll turn up wearing it at their school and excruciate them with embarrassment. But my seal suit is really for bed. It's lovely and slippery. If I can't sleep and am fretting, I imagine I'm a seal on a sunny beach with a gentle breeze. I slither about until I get comfortable and bask. Then I play in the sea for a while. When I begin to grow tired, I sink down to rest and give in. I am becoming an island, a solid body of land with rocky outlying arms and legs. I'm part of the map of the earth and might stay like that forever. But up till now, I've woken to another morning, and sometimes that waking moment is when a new thought becomes clear. That's it then.
Okay. Would you do me a big favor? One of the strengths of your poetry, and one of the things that gives people strength, I think, is the way you always get up and start again. You admit life is a struggle, but you carry on struggling. And my favorite poem, as you know, that you've written, and this goes back a long way, is Nerve. You might read it.
Oh gosh, I'd have to find it. I just wanted to say at first that getting up and starting again, maybe I got that from my dad. When you fall off your pony, he always said you've got to get back on, unless you've actually broken your leg. You've right until the moment when you drop dead, you've got to get back on. I just could say that the first verse about the roof and everything, I came to this house when I got this house in Camden Town where I'm actually still living. It literally was a slum. It had a very primitive toilet and a basin with one cold tap. That's all it had. And everything needed doing up. Nerve. Roof leaks. Stop it with sticky tar, thick and black, like a babe's first shit. Wall cracks. We imperfectly plaster it with a slapped mixture of pinkish powder. Light bulbs break. We're in the dark. Drains block and the sludge reeks of decay. Propping and prodding keep the frail pad cozy and thickly hold the primal soup in check. Neither can we ban weakness from this bone house. I bleed, I ache, I alter every day. Skull lurks, disintegration stalks us. I am unwomaned when I've had no tea. I only find my centre now and then, when good animal spirits give a shove, or where, beyond tiredness, joy slips in, ocean, eros, hear earthly union, love. And when I spin in centrifugal panic, feel dizzy as the velvet night wears thin, I do not flee the hound of heaven, frantic, but from the hole I fear is where my centre should have been. String snaps, I collapse, am disassembled. How now scrap antiquated parts, add, see whether this heap of heterogeneous junk all jumbled fits back together another way? Constantly. This is the price of every poem and of living every time it snarls up wisdom. The permanent point is cordial, being both membership and individual. It needs a great heart not to deviate into religion, courage to utter, endure chaos, utter anew, nerve not to give up making, and, with knots between, thread the blood-red garnet, despite what death will do.
And now for the open section of this episode. We begin with 3 poems from Andrew Dixon.
Shadows. Surely you'll remember how it was when you were young, going out into the sunshine, holding hands with Dad or Mum. Surely you'll remember how your shadow tracked you down, sometimes disappearing, knowing where you'd next be found, and how your shadow lengthened as the sun set off for home, how it cheered you being little that the sun could make you long. But most of all remember those first steps out alone. Your parents stood behind you, and your shadow all your own. The Loch Ness Monster's lullaby. Hush, hush, sleep, little one. Sleep in the ocean of your dreams. Dream in the ocean that was once our own, before the age of endless ice, before the continents grew old. The ocean wider than the world, the ocean always ever known. Dream in our darkest, deepest home. Dream, little one. Dream in our darkest, deepest home. The ocean always ever known. The ocean wider than the world, before the continents grew old. Before the age of endless ice. Dream in the ocean that was once our own. Sleep in the ocean of your dreams. Sleep, little one. Hush, hush. Shuff, 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 shuff. What is that sound? Shuff, 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 shuff. Is it a train? No, it is not. Chuff, chuff is a train. Chuff, chuff. Is it a pigeon up on the roof? I'll tell you the truth, it's certainly not. Pigeons go coof, coof, coof. Enough of these games, I'll tell you for sure. It's Charlie the baby let loose on the floor. He's only 9 months, he crawls like a pro. Shuff, 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 shuff. Just watch him go. Exploring the living room, nosing around. Charlie the bonniest baby bloodhound. Oh, how we love him, he'll make a fine lad. Charlie, hands off, my hidden iPad. He loves to explore, he can't get enough. Thank goodness he's tiring. Shuff, shuff, shuff. Charlie is sleeping. He's run out of steam. Or is he still crawling? Shuff, shuff, in a dream. Shuff, 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 shuff.
Andrew's poems always delight with their sound, and this combined with their serious playfulness make these poems as enchanting for adults as for children. Next, two poems from Lizzie Ballagher, another poet for whom the sound of her language is central.
Cry of the Celts. In the pinch of a late winter that should have flown north by now to leave a southern spring, she moves down Sochi Hall, then sideways into snarling alleyways and slipshod streets. A piper in full Highland dress, his cheeks florid, cap askew, scarlet tartans flapping in the skirling wind, plays Flowers of the Forest. The water is wide, oh waily, waily. She listens inside her hands and feet and deep in her breastbone. So many fluttering pennants of liquid song, rolling and unscrolling in thin rivulets and tendrils to inundate her heart, ensnare her soul. His music blindfolds her to shoppers, cars and blathering shop windows, so now, through muffling tears, she hears instead only the blood-red curdling, ribbon uncurling, melody swirling, scalding purple stain from lost ancestral glens and crags. The plaint and wail of pipes pours out, overflows the heather air, then raises her, sweeps her over paving stones, lifts her free of weeping, light as dancing, to float away. Celtic knot found in translation. Seed to stem to leaf, root to tree to fruit, flower to weed to grief, wood to coal to soot, soot to heart to home, heart to hands to knees, moors to hills to roam, shells to sand to seas, seas to heave to sky, boats to breeze to run, sails to curve to fly, rays to flame to sun, sun to rise to light, stars to blink to fire, moon to wane to night, dusk to church to choir, choir to song to words, cloth to weave to wear, door to woods to birds, help to peace to dare, dare to dream to dawn, eyes to close to sleep, hope to dance to mourn, life to live to keep, keep to path to farm, sheep to fold to fleece, wool to wash to warm, joy to tears to cease, cease to stand to cold, bell to tower to ring, arms to reach to hold, love to bed to sing, sing to sow to grain, shoes to walk to feet, soil to plough to rain, plant to sprout to wheat, wheat to bread to bake, fields to grow to feed, time to clocks to take, corn to gold to seed, seed to stem to leaf, one knot shall salve all grief.
Stephen Wren is a poet I don't always understand, but I have great respect for the authenticity of his poetic project. So it's a real pleasure to be able to host another of his poems in this episode.
An Ode to Blood Pressure for Scipione Riva Rocci. I did not dwell on cell types or colour, only the pressure of blood in my veins. My blood became the star of my theatre. I thanked my parents and cognates and all other guides as the star poured out its life over seats, the cheap ones and the plush ones. Behind the stage and curtain was a heart, a machine that pumped, a boundless wonder. Its sacred physics reached all my organs in the theatre. The immense pressure in my feet as I stood, I buckled under the weight of my blood. The banging of life against my vessels was the first act, second act, and all acts. The pressure built up on the theatre's damp insides. I saw an exit door contort during one machine beat and another one flexed between beats in this bold ticker cycle. The space was safe, so I just clapped and clapped.
The next and final poem, which comes from Alice Willington, also concerns the heart and its physicality.
Ultrasound. The screen turned on, waiting. A minute translates, echoes to light. My heart white silver, pulsing. Fast calculus triangulates, zooms, finds the blood reluctant to leave the ventricle. A second repeat after the boom. A hesitation of butterfly wings before flight. Anyone might pause, surprised from insouciance by long Saharan heat. But life insists, beat.
And that's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed listening. Remember, texts of the poems and more information about the poets can be found on poetryworthhearing.biz. Submissions and comments should be sent to me at poetryworthhearing@gmail.com.